My grandparents decide to send their children, and that's how they get to Iran. So they continue from Uzbekistan to Turkmenistan. They cross the Caspian Sea to separate from their children, to send them to their fate when you don't know when you're going to see them again. This was an excruciating decision. Some people said, we're not going to let our children go. Whatever will be our fate will be their fate. And entire families died of famine. My grandparents said, if we don't save ourselves, at least our children will be saved.
The refugees embarked from Krasnovodsk in the Soviet Republic of Turkmenistan on the shore of the Caspian Sea and traveled to Bandar Pahlavi in Iran. By then, the Allied forces, Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States had occupied Iran to prevent Nazi Germany from taking over the country. Iranians under occupation were suffering from economic hardship, but they greeted the refugees with open arms.
The history of Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina, is a story of heroism and defiance. Every building and artifact in the city bears witness to a nation's struggle to survive atrocities and genocide. One of the most important symbols of Sarajevo's endurance is its Haggadah, a historic Jewish text that has been kept in the city since the 15th century. Dervish Korkut was the man who saved the Sarajevo Haggadah, and a Jewish woman during the Second World War when the city was occupied by Nazi Germany and its allies.
You spent many years of your life working on propaganda, in theory and in practice. How widespread is this phenomenon of propaganda? Does it exist everywhere? And, is it particular to certain countries?
Propaganda is part of human communication, and there's no escaping it. Propaganda is one way that groups of people come together as a society. So propaganda is as old as human history. In the 20th century, propaganda began to be associated with aspects of social cohesion and social control. First, in World War I, the Great War, as nations and people were motivated and inspired to work together to fight a common enemy. And then later on, in a very destructive way, to attack opponents and create conditions for mass murder and genocide. It's interesting how there are many similarities across different autocratic countries. In China, of course, propaganda is identified as a core value of the Chinese Communist Party, and propaganda is considered an honor to participate in the creation of propaganda. And there, of course, Xi Jinping has kind of turned himself now into another kind of supreme ruler. Autocratic countries use very deep values to communicate the validity of their ideologies.
So the original source for the Rothschild conspiracy is from 1846 with a pamphlet written by a Frenchman called Georges d'Enville under a pseudonym called Satan. Now this conspiracy theory then began by asserting some 30 years after the event that at the Battle of Waterloo, a man called Nathan Rothschild, a prominent European banker living in London, had been at the Battle of Waterloo and, knowing which way the battle was going, hired a chain of horses to rush to the Belgian coast, hired a fisherman to take him across stormy seas, more coaches to London where he could, on the stock exchange, make a killing, make a huge amount, a vast fortune. Now this document, as I say, some 30 years after the event itself, is the only real source we have of this alleged conspiracy by Rothschild, and it falls apart as soon as you start looking at the actual historical record. So Nathan Rothschild wasn't at the Battle of Waterloo, there was no storm in the English Channel, he didn't make a vast killing on the stock market on that day.